Good morning to this extra early morning edition of the SteelerFury.com podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Kohlman. You know me as Smith Smoking on the message boards, joined by the best colleagues that money cannot buy. Korey Karbowsky, you know him as Corey39, and Wil Masisak, you know him as Bradshaw to Ben. Gentlemen, how are we doing on this fine, very early, hopefully last morning edition of the SteelerFury.com podcast?
Never say never, man. Never say never. Good, man.
Yeah. Good.
Hey, the Steelers are 2-0. What do we got to be sad about?
That's very true. I'm not sure I would have thought that was going to happen, to be very honest, just the way that we started looking at this season from the beginning. But we'll take it. So it is what it is. And I jest. I'm just not much of a morning person, SteelerFury.com. So if you happen to notice me rubbing my eyes, it's just because I'm trying to wake up from this slumber that I'm usually not normally out of until like 8 o'clock. But I'm just as chipper as ever, if anything. So, and just as combative too. So,
yes, it has nothing to do with the crystal meth.
No. How do you know? I'm just joking. But no, so it was a nice, another nice win here this past week against Denver. We actually scored a touchdown. I mean, by this rate, we might actually score 2 this week. So, and of all things, who had on their bingo card that Darnell Washington was going to be the first Steeler to score this year?
So Darnell Washington first leading the NFL in touchdown receptions by tight end.
Is that a real stat? Oh my gosh! Wow. I know it hasn't been a good year for tight ends so far, but yeesh. Man, that is funny. Well, so I thought we played pretty well against Denver, but the one thing we have got to eliminate is the penalties. I mean, Justin Fields' day would have looked a heck of a lot better if we just would have gotten rid of some penalties. Lots of big plays called back, several big ones to George Pickens. A touchdown got called back to George Pickens. So at this point, it kind of feels like Pittsburgh's holding back Pittsburgh. But I think that's the conclusion we've come to the past few years anyway.
Yeah, it's Corey. Take it, man.
You know, we were asking for a big week for Pat Freiermuth, and he led the team in receptions and yards. So looks like he
damning with faint praise. Are you familiar with that expression?
Yeah.
But yeah, 4 catches, 39 yards. He had double the catches than anyone else, 10 more yards than anyone else. So no jokes on us. But we won. It was sloppy. Seems like it's kind of what we predicted. I mean, I guess I was slightly more encouraged with how the offense looked. It wasn't as bad as I kind of thought it could have looked. But, we also didn't think the Broncos matched up well, and they didn't. So I think this week's going to be a pretty good litmus test of where we really are at compared to last week. But happy to come out of it with a win. A lot of good to take away from it still.
I think, first of all, the penalties in the NFL are always the first couple of weeks high, I think. And, it's sort of like the officials are making their point. They're drawing their line in the sand of like, this is what, we could call, we will call, whatever. And I have a feeling that it's every game. It's not just the Steelers. I don't even think even the Steelers opponents this year have had a lot of weird penalties as well. So, yeah, some of that will continue and you have to overcome it. But some of it is that it's just the league and just something that you have to deal with now. So there's that. Secondly, I think this because of the lack of hitting in pads and training camps and the lack of teams wanting to use the preseason to play and to get ready to go for week 1, it feels like week 1 and week 2 have been sort of exhibition-y like teams are kind of working things out on the field. You could see that from the Falcons. The difference between the Falcons game 1 and game 2 with their offense was huge. Now some of that was that the Steelers were a different kind of opponent for them and a different level opponent than the Eagles. But the Eagles defense, they got guys too. It's just that Kirk Cousins looked like a different player. Like he got to shaking the rust off a little bit and figured out what he needed to get together. So I think that's something to take into account when you're considering, are the Steelers, do we believe in them at 2-0? They're one of only 9 teams that are 2-0. So like, does that mean something? And yeah, it's better than, figuring things out while you're losing. But I'm not sure they've been really super challenged yet, especially at the quarterback position. And that's a bigger issue when you're facing a team that is probably not going to get shut out very much. You had a rookie quarterback last week and also a Denver team that in general struggled last year, and they still haven't really put it together. So yeah, bigger test this week. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, no doubt. Let's go ahead and kind of move on. I feel like we've kind of hit most of the points from the Denver game already. We get the rare privilege. Well, privilege is a strong word here. To get to play an additional Harbaugh brother this year. Jim Harbaugh, by way of the Michigan Wolverines, is now in the NFL playing with the Chargers and Justin Herbert, Joey Bosa and crew. So let's dive right in. I think it was inevitable that we were going to see Jim Harbaugh back in the NFL, especially after he won his little pendant of a trophy at Michigan. Sorry, I'm in the Midwest. He cheated. I was going to bring it up. He cheated. So we get the one Harbaugh brother who's more incompetent, and now we get the cheater too. But just joking. But very different Charger team than kind of what we've seen in the past. No Keenan Allen anymore. Got rid of Mike Williams too, so they've got new weapons on offense this year. Still remotely the same defense for the most part, and that's kind of where I'm going to kick it off as far as matchups go. Mac is, he's another year older. So is Bosa, but they are still very good edge players, and I think that's what's going to potentially give the Steelers a lot of issues this week. Dan Moore is going to have to be at the top of his game. It's Dan Moore. He's going to give up that sack or two a game, pressure wise. So it's also going to be interesting to see how Troy Fautanu, goes against two proven veteran edge guys as well. So those guys are going to determine, whether Justin Fields has time to throw this week or not. So I think that's kind of the first big matchup, which is going to, see whether the Steelers can really move their offense or not. Well, what are some other matchups we should be on the lookout for this week, guys?
By the way, I think I remember from a year ago when talking about the other Bosa that this is the Bosa that switches sides more. So he will come at both tackles. They'll move him around a good bit. Same with Mac.
Yeah.
And that Joey Bosa against Dan Moore thing definitely troublesome. I think he's the kind of guy that maybe gives Dan Moore a little trouble. And on the other side, Fautanu, I mean, we have no idea really. Not to say that Denver's edge rushers aren't professionals and whatever, but yeah, I think it's a different animal step up to see Joey Bosa. Although if you get TJ Watt in practice every day, you got a pretty good idea what's coming. But the matchup for me is the Chargers run defense. I think the Steelers right now have been living on the fact that while they do not have any kind of like breakaway runs, their longest run of the season, I think, is either 12 or 13 yards, and they only have a handful that are over 10 yards. So they're living on this 5-6 yard run play consistently, right? Not having too many run plays that are tackled for a loss or no gain stuffed. So at the Chargers, I think at this point, they played Carolina, so you can't even really count their stats against Carolina. But even against the Raiders, they right now they're, by almost every metric that I know of, they're the best defense against the run of the NFL, and that includes even relative rankings. In other words, counting for the fact that Carolina is no good. So I think the Steelers are going to have to run the ball to be able to be in this game, to win this game, for reasons that I might talk about later. But I feel like goes without saying. If they can't run it, they're going to be more dependent on passing the football, and they haven't really shown themselves to be a diversified passing attack. So that to me is the one matchup I'd really like to see. There's some good. The Steelers' offensive line put some good things on tape, but doing it against a better opponent, once again, these are steps right along the way, and this will be an interesting one this week.
Korey, before we go to you here, I'm glad we started talking about the offensive line, because there's definitely something that I should have brought up from this past week that deserves its own little notion here. What the hell are the Steelers doing, thinking they're going to rotate in Broderick Jones while starting the rookie at right tackle? We have to touch on this, because that must be the most asinine line of thinking I can possibly think of for an NFL team to do. This isn't some college football team that's still trying to figure out who its starter is at right tackle, in my opinion. This is the NFL. If we're going to start Fatanu, let him play the whole game and then bring in Broderick Jones if you need to, because the one series that we decided to test this little bullshit theory out, excuse my French, it's early, it's flying early. We put Broderick Jones in. He has 3 different drive-killing penalties on the same drive. I mean, I don't understand what their line of thinking is, that if Fatanu is playing well, we're going to throw Broderick Jones in just to see how he's playing. Korey, you start off on
that. This is just something where, great head coaches don't do things like this. Like, these are not actions that, his record is his record over the past, however many years. But teams that are looking to win Super Bowls don't just rotate their 2 first-round picks at right tackle just because. You either bite the bullet and say, you know what, Dan Moore, we appreciate what you've done, but we're trying to develop a guy here. Put Broderick at left, which was the plan when you drafted him. You said it was. You said you drafted him to play left tackle. And then if you're not going to do that, if you think Fatanu's better, just roll with Fatanu. Say, and I think that's what majority of the head coaches in the NFL would have done, is bite the bullet, say, you know what, we might have fucked up with that Broderick pick, but we're just going to take our first rounder, throw him out there. We think he's better. But just this indecision's just, I think, kind of telling of kind of where he's at, where it seems like he's lost a step. And it seems like he's lost a step in a couple of ways, but that's just not something where it strikes me as a head coach that's confident, or a head coach who's really at the top of his game. That's not something that really happens. That's like high school stuff. It's not NFL stuff. So we've been a little down on Tomlin for a bit now on this podcast, but this is, I think, just another example of something that just doesn't happen on better coached teams.
Yeah, Will.
But I mean, look at the way that the offensive line has been handled for years. Like I think that they've thoroughly mismanaged where people play, who getting the best 5 on the field, the draft situation, who to draft, whatever. I mean, I will be the first to say I was not as high on Broderick Jones as I was on some other guys in the draft. Not that I didn't think that he had talent, but I just felt like you're taking a stab there with a guy that's really not developed. And I guess we'll have to see if he actually develops, might turn into be a great pick. But in this case, I'm going to defend the player. I think it's really hard. I think already it's hard. You get demoted in a situation where you, A, might not agree with the decision, and B, don't feel like you really got a chance to play the position. Like, I don't think he really got the chance to play left tackle position, be stuck there for a couple of weeks in camp and really show what he could do. And since they kept bouncing him around and he's been injured, I feel like I get it that he was probably, took it kind of harder than we might realize. And then the idea of sticking him in as a token in the game in the 3rd series, like, get out there, kid. I just feel like for an offensive lineman, that's a really tough thing to do, to like suddenly be like, okay, you're in. maybe if you're forced in because of injury or something that you feel like you got to pick it up. But I do get it. I'm not going to justify the mistakes that he made when he got in there. You still got to play hard and play well. But I get the idea that mentally maybe it's like taking a great starting pitcher or a good starting pitcher and throwing him in relief suddenly in a situation where he didn't expect to be in the game. It might take a little while to clear your head of that stuff, and the inevitable happened. But I feel like, if they had wanted to draft somebody that was a solid right tackle because they were going to keep Dan Moore, they would have made a different decision at the time. But that which then also it's like, then why pick Fatano if you think Broderick Jones is if you think you're going to keep Dan Moore starting and you're going to have, you still picked Broderick Jones last year, then why spend the time or draft capital on Fatano? I don't really get it. So I think they're thinking about offensive line, how they coach them, to the guys that they selected in the draft, to how they develop them, to where they play them, to mixing and matching guys' positions over the years. I don't really understand it.
Yeah, I don't think any of us really understand the mystery behind what has gone on the Steelers' offensive line the past few years. Whether we're drafting people to not play their own position, we've touched upon it a million times with the Kendrick Green pick a few years ago, who's shockingly enough a decent backup guard for Houston.
No, he's starting. He's a starter in Houston.
Oh, is he? Gotcha. I must have missed that.
Dotson, he's like one of the top 3 highest paid guards in the NFL, and he earned it.
Yeah. So it just the mystery continues. It's like the Hardy Boys and the finding of the offensive linemen to put in the right spot. But
I don't know mystery. It's been since Munchak left. That's what Munchak developed. Everyone we had, everyone was in the right positions, and basically since the year he left, that's when the Kendrick Green, Kevin Dotson, that's when all this stuff started, where we're sliding guys everywhere. Where it's, I don't know if it's we can't get in the right O-line coach. I don't know if it's the head coach who's getting too involved and doesn't think it matters what position they play. But it's since the day Munchak left, it's been a nightmare.
Yeah, the other interesting thing is, like, Arthur Smith was definitely here by the time the draft rolled around. That was one of the first things the Steelers did this offseason. So, to a degree, he signed off on the Fatanu pick too. Is like, yeah, give me another offensive lineman to run my offense or whatever. But I mean, it'd be interesting to know whether, they had a conversation of like, okay, where do you actually see him playing along this offensive line, or no, we're just taking the top guy available, because, Tomlin and Khan, they made a big deal of like, oh, if Fatanu was, an inch taller, no one would be talking about whether he's a guard or a tackle, all that rhetoric they put in there. So because initially when he was drafted, I was thinking, oh, he's going to play a guard spot, because that just seemed to be what a lot of people thought he might do, was slide inside, and that made a lot of sense initially if Dan Moore was going to stay at left tackle. But then they made such a point to say, no, Fatanu's a tackle. So now we've got 3 tackles and not all of them can play. So just very interesting to see how the Steelers run their offensive line stuff.
I mean, I like the Fatanu, but by the way, I like the Fatanu pick a lot. So I don't really have a problem with picking him in the vacuum. It is just sort of understanding this. And for Arthur Smith, he fits Arthur Smith's offense a lot better than Broderick Jones or Dan Moore does. So like I get all that.
Yeah, sure. I liked Fatanu too. I was just more I would say I was more surprised at the time, just because I thought if we were going to go tackle, there were more pure tackles in the draft. At least, people were thinking that way, or that wide receiver that we still desperately need to cross some George Pickens. But
you can say Tyler Guyton, Jeremy.
I wasn't going to go there. But Guyton has looked pretty good through 2 weeks. But I mean, he's still got a long way to go too.
Listen, man, if I were the GM, we'd have had DeJuan Jones as your right tackle. True. He'd have been doing fine. And then this year, when you came to round 1, you'd have felt a little less desperate. Maybe. I don't know. They'd be in the same boat. They'd still try to take a left tackle. They're taking Fatano. But, if you don't trade away that asset last year, you could have traded up for Fuaga too. So it's like,
Looks phenomenal.
right. So I'm just saying there are consequences to all the decisions that you make. And those of us here would have made mistakes along the way. So it's not like I expect them to be perfect, but I do feel like the plan drifted a little bit. It was kind of like, we're going to get an offensive lineman last year. We're going to get the best young offensive lineman we can get, and not necessarily, and they get, zeroed in on a guy, and it wasn't necessarily like, it was a good choice. It wasn't necessarily the best choice, but time will tell how good it is. I think Fatano, if he plans out, you're going to forget about the Broderick Jones pick, because Fatano ends up being like your starting left tackle in 2 years, then it's not going to be as big a deal.
And then it's not like they've had to do much work with him, but Zach Frazier has been a top 5 center this year.
Yeah, fantastic.
So, yeah, that was
gold on that one.
Yeah, for all the negatives, but I mean, we've seen this before though. We've seen guys who came in as rookies and young players and played really, really well, and then their play goes to shit. Like I hope, that he doesn't fall prey to that the way that some of the other young players have. Because
Who said it?
I'm not at all convinced the coaching staff is not the problem.
Right. Well, you brought something up there that I wanted to touch on really quick. You said something about how I don't expect them to be perfect. I don't know, Will. I've never had an evaluation and a player never not pan out. So I don't know what you're talking about.
It helps to have the kind of memory that you have.
Yeah. No, trust me, Steeler Fury. There have been plenty of guys who I thought were going to pan out that barely ever saw a snap in the NFL. So.
I saw. Speaking of which, I saw Peyton Hendershot got cut.
Oh, did he? Did he? He was one of those IU kids that was always talented and a pretty good overall athlete, but you wondered how long he was going to be around. So I think he'll get picked up somewhere. But
I'm just kidding. I was just kidding, man.
Mm-hmm. But he was a little bit of a case at IU too. So nothing really surprises me when it comes to him. But we'll see. But let's get back on track here. I definitely wanted to touch base on that offensive line stuff. It just slipped my mind when we got started here. But Korey, what's another matchup we need to be on the lookout for against the Chargers?
I mean, this is a big one. Joe Alt's been nails at right tackle, and he's one of those guys where, kind of the thing with him is he was almost flawless as a prospect, other than he's 6'8", plays super vertically, where it didn't just pop up in college, but it's one of those things where people looked and said, okay, this is going to be something where going to have to see if he can hold up in the NFL. And TJ Lowe gets a foot and a half, 2 feet off the ground sometimes with some of these. So I think I don't think Rashawn Slater's going to have any problem with Alex Highsmith. That's nothing against him. But Rashawn Slater's probably the best pass protector outside of Lane Johnson in the league right now. And so I think it's going to really be on Joe Alt to kind of, or TJ Watt and Joe Alt to kind of figure out who's going to, win their side of the ball throughout the game. Just one thing I did want to shout out, I can't remember who Will's team is where he has like all of his dudes who get drafted go there. But I mean, this looks like
Jacksonville at the moment. Jacksonville, yeah.
This looks like one of our drafted teams for me. Jahir Taylor, AJ Finley. You got Asante Samuel Jr., Diane Henley, who was massive for me. Scott Matlock, and then Atito Ogbania. Like, this is half their team is due to undrafted team. So, funny enough, a couple DBs, couple D linemen, 2 linebackers. It's kind of spaced out, but I do like the defense a lot. I'm not going to take another matchup. I'll let Jeremy or Will have that one. But I do think that Joe Walt, TJ Watt matchup is going to be a decider in the pass game, at least. I'm a little worried about it in the run game. being frank, because Joe Walt's a load, and you can run at TJ Watt. It's a lot more successful than running away from him. But be curious just to kind of see what Joe Walt's made out of.
Gotcha. I mean, one thing I was gonna just mention is I know the Steelers secondary has looked good through 2 weeks. I expect Porter to go up against Quentin Johnson. I think that's going to be a wash for the most part. I expect Porter to win most of those matchups. I expect Johnson to do, okay. So, I don't know. Can you really say you started coming on against Carolina? I don't know. Will, kind of like you said, you have to throw that game out with the bathwater. There's really not much of a measuring stick there. Good.
Jeremy, the way that the Olympics, what is it, the diving or one of them where it's like you throw out the low score and the high score, average the rest of the scores. That's the way playing Carolina will be like. You got to throw out Carolina and you throw out playing San Francisco or Kansas City or whatever, and then you average the rest of the scores. Yeah.
Right. But so again, it's like I don't really know how much you can judge there. So the matchup I was more leaning towards is Ladd McConkey versus Dante Jackson. Dante Jackson, very good straight line man corner. McConkey's got that little bit of wiggle, so I think you could see McConkey win some more of those matchups. But we'll see if the Chargers offensive line, you guys have mentioned it, has time for Herbert to throw the ball. I think we have plus matchups on the interior, honestly, that I don't think the interior of the Chargers line is all that great. Zion Johnson's kind of been a disappointment so far, if you ask me. And then their other guys, Bradley Bozeman, I thought he was okay, when he was at Baltimore, but just nothing too special. And then Trey Pipkins, who feels like he's been with the Chargers forever, never seems like he can stay healthy as at right guard. So I actually think with Benton, Hayward, I know Hayward hasn't been the greatest so far, but
last week.
Yeah, I thought Hayward was pretty solid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But just more rounding into form, just further removed from the injury. I think we have a chance to win on the interior there. It's whether we can win on the outside. I think is the big thing as far as the defensive part of it goes. To me,
I think we're dancing around the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is a quarterback, Justin Herbert. First of all, he tweaked his ankle. Is that they claim that he finished the game on it, and they claim that it's not that big a deal. So I'm going to guess that it isn't that big a deal. But if your escapability out of the pocket is one of the things that makes you a really elite quarterback, which in this case it does, then, can you basically, you don't have to be 100% healthy, but you got to be healthy enough to escape TJ Watt. So if you can't escape TJ Watt, then, you have issues. And if the interior of the defensive, the Steelers defensive line is getting pressures, then it makes it even more imperative that you're able to step through. So even with the great offensive tackle play that they've had, that's a question mark to me. It's like, well, can he, manipulate the way that he can? As far as the weapons are concerned in those matchups, I'll say this: Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, I think when they were there, were super productive, and we thought, wow, like those are great talents, and now he lost those guys. Yeah, except for they went to places where they're not producing at all. So it sort of makes you feel like a little bit like the Ben days when guys left, you realize, oh, well, a good part of that guy and his success was the quarterback playing, right? So to me, these matchups about the interior and about Steelers stopping the run and being able to run at TJ Watt, yeah, that stuff all like matters. But what really matters is what it boils down to is if they can protect the quarterback well enough for him to distribute the ball the way that he has shown he's totally capable of doing, and the way that he's done against the Steelers defense in the past. If none of that stuff really changes, then the Steelers have problems because, the game is a race to 20. Justin Herbert has never lost a game where his defense has given up less than 20 points, and the Steelers have struggles getting to 20 points. That's the ball game. That's the matchup. Is if the Steelers are not going to play a game where they're going to focus on scoring more points than they usually focus on, and they come up with something to do in the passing game that gets them to that point, then the other guy's going to beat you. So even if you're good against the run, and even if you get a decent pass rush, you're going to get 20 points in all likelihood.
Yeah, very, very good point. It feels like I try to avoid the quarterback, talking about our quarterback situation all the time, because it feels like we're always just so down on what we think it will do versus what happens and all that. And I actually think Fields played pretty well versus Denver. He had some plays called back, obviously because of penalties and stuff, but well, boy, he made that wicked throw to George Pickens down the sideline. I was like, "Whoo, that's the first round talent popping out. We just need to see it more often." So, I would definitely say Herbert has the edge just because he's more of a traditional quarterback. I think he passes the ball better, uh, as far as traditionally as it goes. But the quarterback battle is always going to be a thing when you're watching Pittsburgh Steelers. So that has not changed as well. So adequately put it. Any other matchups we should be on the lookout for this week? All right. Well, Korey, you're going to have a chance to talk about an offensive lineman you mentioned earlier in Fuaga, who's playing with the Saints. They're definitely one of the games we're going to be getting to this week. You know what? Screw it. Let's start out with them to start off the match. You get the Philadelphia Eagles coming off their Monday night loss. Saquon, two hands. I don't know what to tell you, buddy. But they travel to the very surprising New Orleans Saints, who have just opened the season on bonker status. I don't think anyone saw the Saints being as dominant as they have been through 8 quarters of football. They've scored on every drive this year, which is just an absolute insane stat when you think about it. They have not punted. They have not turned it over. Absolutely ridiculous. Derek Carr is playing extremely well in this new I think it's Clint Kubiak. That's their offensive coordinator now. A lot of fun to watch. But so New Orleans is at home. They are favored by 3. Korey, I'm going to let you start off with this one since you mentioned Fuaga earlier as a offensive lineman the Steelers could have potentially drafted had they had, as Wil mentioned, if they had the extra capital, they could have gone up and taken him.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the Saints are good. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think that they are what they've looked like. I think it's a bit fool's gold. And I think the Eagles coming off that game that they really, really, really should have won. I think this is going to be a bit of a riding of the seas, water coming to its level kind of game.
Love that expression.
Saints can't just score every drive for a third straight game. If they do, maybe we are talking about them as a Super Bowl contender, and Clint Kubiak is going to be whichever Kubiak he is. He's going to be the highest paid coach in the NFL next year. But I do think they have to, slow down at least a little bit. And I think that the Eagles, even with their flaws, are still a good team. So I'm going to go with the Eagles. I think it's going to be like a narrow one, say 30 to 20, 30, let's say 30 to 24. It's a little closer than it feels at 6 points, but I think the Saints are still good. I just don't know if they're, best offense of the last 100 years good.
That's fair. Well, what are your thoughts?
I'm going to go the opposite direction. I actually believe in the Saints. I throw out the Carolina game because that's what you do.
Right.
Yeah, just imagine they had a really good game last week. No, I feel like the one kind of success that you can really duplicate is dominant offensive line play. And I feel like this is a great test for them. I mean, Philly's defensive line is definitely like stacked, right? But I watched that game. I'm on Monday night. The Eagles do not look right. They haven't really looked right for more than a year now. So expecting them to suddenly bounce back and be the Eagles, the dominating Eagles that they were a couple of years ago, is probably a mistake. No offense, Korey. But I think I like the talent on the Eagles, but I don't think they're really getting the most out of them right now. And they have a little bit of a problem, especially on defense, that they have too many guys. Like, they have too many guys, and they don't really have a clearly, it seems amorphous. There doesn't seem like a real clear hierarchy or a way of, alignment that really works for them. So I feel like if you have a dominant offensive line going against a team that isn't playing its best together, that's a recipe for success on your offense. So I will take New Orleans. It may be a close game because I do agree that Philly was a little bit embarrassed on Monday and will come out with all the guns firing. But I really like what New Orleans has done, not just their offensive line, but their defense. I think is a little bit underrated as well. So I'll take. I mean, we tend to underrate teams that don't have quarterbacks that we think are elite, and we don't really think their quarterback is elite, but they're winning. They're winning in a more replicable way than I would say even the Steelers are right now.
Yeah, I'll kind of build off that. I like the Saints here too, to winning cover. You mentioned the defense; it's playing outstanding, and I think that's an underrated aspect of who they are. Everyone's like, oh, they've put up 47 points and 41 points, and it's like, yeah, and then they didn't allow Dallas to put up more than 20. And that's a good offense, whether you like Prescott and his collection of weapons or not. So I like the Saints there. Well, Will, you kind of put it out. I think a lot of people thought Derek Carr was like on his way out in the NFL, but all of a sudden you put him in an offensive system that's been proven time and time again. With the Kubiaks, the outside zone running, the play action passing, the just a very quarterback friendly style of offense. That's just the best way to put it. He's been pretty much flawless. He's made every throw they've asked him to make. They're not putting him in bad situations. Like, honestly, he hasn't been like the past 2 years, whether it was the Saints or the Raiders. He's got tons of talent around him. And I'm not sure I really thought that heading into the Saints season, but I think it's Rashid Shaheed.
Yeah, Rashid Shaheed.
I mispronounce it every time.
Parents have a sense of humor. Yeah.
But I mean, he's been playing great, and they have not really thrown the ball to Chris Olave a lot. And I think that's the thing. It's like, boy, when that offense gets really going, and they're going to be able to find a way to, capitalize on Olave. They've got a myriad of tight ends and Foster Moreau, who I really liked coming out, and then the wide receiver convert from Oregon, Jawan Johnson, who's very hard to cover out of the tight end slot just because he's so athletic. Not to mention they have one of the most unique players in the entire NFL in Taysom Hill, and they haven't involved him yet this year. Like, I stashed him in fantasy thinking, oh, this might be a fun little play. No, he hasn't been involved at all. It just extremely frustrating in that sense. But they have a lot of talent on offense. Alvin Kamara's looked great. Like, this is the type of offense that he's needed for a long time. The outside runs where he allows him to use his speed and quickness to cut back. Things are just firing on all cylinders right now. And one more thing from Will said, Atlanta ran the ball all day on Philadelphia for the most part. There were a few key plays where Philadelphia, got stops where when they really needed them to, or they kind of sold out against the run. But like Will said, if the offensive line can come in and control the line of scrimmage for the Saints, I think the Saints are going to, be looking at another game where they win by double digits. I will say this. If AJ Brown is still out, I don't think he will be. I think it was just kind of an ab strain or abdominal thing or whatever. But if he is out, I don't think the Eagles can win. I think AJ Brown has to be on the field to allow all the other pieces in Philadelphia to win. So I like the Saints there too. And now we're going to talk about the Harbaugh brother we don't face this week. Baltimore is traveling to Dallas. If you'd have told me Baltimore was going to be 0-2 to start the season, I would have said no way in hell. There's no way in hell. But the Raiders played them very well this past week. So Baltimore, believe it or not, is a 1.5 point favorite heading into Dallas. I'm not sure I like that, but Will, I'm going to let you start off on this one first.
I mean, they're both 0-2, right? They're both unexpected. I don't think either team expected to be 0-2.
But Dallas won week 1 versus Cleveland.
Oh, they did. I'm sorry, against Cleveland. That's right. Sorry.
No, you're good.
I'm thinking about other teams that are 0-2. Yeah, I think the Ravens are too good to go 0-3, basically. I mean, maybe you look at the matchup. Dallas to me is a solid team, and you feel good if you beat them. And I think if you lose to them, you don't feel too bad. Like that's where they are, right? They're an above average NFL team right now. But I think the Ravens expectations are bigger than that. And I do think actually we talked about them before the season started being a little bit, a lot of changes on the offensive line and making, and defense, they lost a lot of guys that they really had depended on in the past, et cetera, et cetera. But I think actually you saw that game against Kansas City. It'd be hard for me to believe that team that played Kansas City on opening night can't beat Dallas in Dallas. That if they have that kind of a plan and are that successful in executing what they want to do on offense and defense, they should beat Dallas.
Gotcha, Korey.
Yeah, I think this is a game where Baltimore wishes they didn't have to go to Dallas 0-2, but I think it's one that they probably just grit out and win. I just think they're the better team than Dallas, and I just don't think they're an 0-3 team. I think Will's hit it on the head. That team that we saw versus Kansas City just is not an 0-3 team. And this is the kind of game where, you lose this one, this could start to just this is 0-3 is hard to come back for playoffs. That's a lot of wins you got to string together, and the NFL season's hard. They're pretty healthy right now. This is just one they can't really afford to drop. I think just for the simple fact that Will said they're not an 0-3 team, I think they just pull this one out somehow.
Gotcha. I have to admit, I'm a little torn here. Just because I really didn't see Baltimore dropping their home opener versus the Raiders, and the Raiders found a way to grit out, a win that I don't think many people thought could happen. I will say this though, and I think I agree with you guys for the most part, because this almost feels like a must-win type of scenario for Baltimore before they go down this path of, oh boy, things are about to get really harder, because they get Buffalo the week after that. They go to Cincinnati after that, Tampa Bay, Cleveland, and upcoming weeks after that. They really do need a win. And the one thing I will say after watching Dallas, that especially this past week, that defense is not the same quite yet with Dan Quinn not being there. Dan Quinn kind of had that defense pretty well run, like a well-oiled machine. I think Mike Zimmer is still trying to figure out how to best utilize the guys on that team. Obviously, Mike Parsons is unbelievable. It'll be interesting to see if, he can have a day like Crosby did this past week for the Raiders did. He had 2 sacks and was very disruptive all around. So I think it's more about everyone else on that defense, and it just doesn't feel like that dominant defense that it can be quite yet. So I'll give it to the Ravens. They're going to cover. It's a 1.5 line, so it's like if you win, you're going to cover. So I don't always understand those 1-point lines. It's like, what's the point? You're saying if they win, they win. Yeah, obviously. But so
there's a tie. There is a tie once in a while. That's what only time it ever helps you, right?
Yeah. I guess there's you get that inevitable push every now and then. Let's talk about a 2-0 team that's traveling to a very surprise 2-0 team. The Texans are headed to Minnesota, who I don't think many people gave Minnesota the light of day this year after they, let Kirk Cousins go to Atlanta, sign Sam Darnold. I think most people are like, okay, Minnesota's clearly playing to up their draft pick next year. But Minnesota is a surprise 2-0, and they've actually looked pretty decent doing it too. So I'll start off on this one. I expect Houston to win this game. It's a 2.5. They're a 2.5-point favorite. But at the same time, Minnesota, I don't know what it is. They have been very resilient. They found ways to move the ball, even though they've downgraded at quarterback. They've downgraded at running back. Their offensive line is playing decent. Their defense is actually playing pretty decent too after losing, a guy like Danielle Hunter and all that. So talk about a team just playing well, but Houston's just has such a high level of talent. They've got 3 really good receivers. Joe Mixon's playing well, even though he does supposedly have an ankle injury. Ankle injury. So it'll be interesting to see how that progresses this week. But I like Houston in this. That they have a better defense too. So, Korey, I'll kick it to you for.
I think Houston's the better team, but I don't really know what it is. I'm just getting, I'm feeling Minnesota for some reason. I think one of those weird games where, Minnesota, I feel like historically always wins a lot early in the season. I feel like every year they're kind of really good and they kind of peter out and they end up in that wild card hunt. They're the ones coughing it up. But not really much logic here. I feel like it's home game. Minnesota's probably feeling themselves a little bit with Darnold. I feel like they might get this one. So I'm going to take, Minnesota obviously to win, which would mean they, get the points. But I'm going to say Minnesota gets this one. Just a weird game.
I love how I went out all logically, and then Korey was like, gut pick. Gut pick. I'm not going to really explain it, but gut pick. I love it. Wil, what are your thoughts, bud?
Well, what's funny about that is that I sort of agree with them. Like I found this to be one of the 2 toughest games to pick this week. Just looking ahead to see what is their really play next. They play Jacksonville next, because I'm thinking it's a little bit of a look ahead trap game for them. I believe I'm going to say almost the same thing. I think Houston is the more talented team by a significant margin, and it does just feel like just lining up for Minnesota. It's just a road game lull before you go back and play your big divisional game, and so far everything is kind of going Houston's way. So yeah, I think this would end up being a little bit of like a later in the year we'll be like, wow, that was weird. They lost to Minnesota, but yeah, I buy it. And it's also, if you're going to lose a game and you're Houston, that's one of the more affordable games to lose. So I will go against the grain, grit my teeth, and say Minnesota, and then we're all going to be embarrassed when they lose by 30. But
all right. Well, I will say this: we're going to keep it in the NFC here. Probably what I think a lot of people are considering the game of the week, even though these 2 teams are 1-1. The Detroit Lions are head to the Arizona Cardinals. Detroit is favored by 3, which I actually found very surprising, considering how Arizona was played this year and how well they played with Buffalo to start the year. But then additionally, how much they dominated the Rams last week, which I don't know if you guys remember, but I thought the Rams were going to win that. So it shows you what
I might have remembered that while it was happening. Yeah.
Funny enough, I think both of you chose Cardinals, so could be wrong. But anyway, let's not dwell on my shortcomings. I think this could be the game of the week. You've got the Detroit Lions, who a lot of people expect to take that next step this year, be that true Super Bowl contending team. They end up losing last week in kind of a divisional round matchup type game with Tampa Bay, a game that they won last year to go to the conference championship. So you have that there, but then at the same time, Arizona, I thought, had the Buffalo game all sewn up, and then they let Buffalo just roar back and beat them there. They go out and embarrass kind of the Rams last week. Should be a really fun game. Kyler Murray had a perfect passer rating last week. So just you have Kyler playing at an extremely high level. I think you have Detroit slowly getting there. Just fell short last week. I like Arizona. I know it sounds crazy, but I really don't understand the Detroit being favored by 3 going into Arizona with how well Arizona's played this year. That just, when I wrote down that line, I was like, that can't be right. That just can't be right. So I'm taking Arizona to cover and win. Wil.
Where I stand on this. Last week I was saying that I felt like Arizona was, they hadn't put it together yet, and they hadn't thrown to Marvin Harrison yet. And now last week comes around, you throw to Marvin Harrison a little bit more, and suddenly you have a perfect passer rating and you blow out, pretty good team, albeit injured Rams team. They lost Cooper Kupp rather in that game. Korey Karbowsky, Cooper Cup.
He wishes he was that good.
But so I kind of feel like that Detroit 3 is a sort of like a sucker bet. I like Arizona to win this game. It probably Kyler Murray doesn't put up another perfect passer rating. It's actually I remember seeing a stat once about guys that had a perfect passer rating, and the following game, like it took a while for them to get back to that level. But I suppose if you watch that game, it just feels like they have, they're getting the most out of what they got to go there, and they got a lot of weapons, and they got a guy that can, when he's healthy, can distribute it to them. So I think the offense is really the story for them, although their defense has played well for 2 weeks as well. In a way, I'm more impressed by what the Cardinals have done in 2 games than many other 2-0. I mean, more than some of the 2-0 teams because of who they played. But Buffalo, you just lost to a guy that's a quarterback that is too good and doesn't quit. It's like losing to Tom Brady, not quite at that level, but something like that, or Patrick Mahomes. So I tend to write that one off a little bit. I think Arizona's better than advertised. Sorry, that was a long way of saying that.
No, you're good.
Early.
Corey.
Yeah, I've been on the Arizona train since before the season, and I think where this boils down to me is if we were playing one of these teams this week, who would I rather play? And I would 100% rather play the Lions right now. Jared Goff has been asked to throw the ball a lot, and it hasn't really had great results. Amon-Ra St. Brown hasn't gotten going. Sam Laporta hasn't really gotten going. Jahmyr Gibbs is second fiddle still to David Montgomery. It's just kind of the Lions aren't really clicking, and I think the Cardinals are just good. Like they have players. They have a good head coach, good defensive head coach. They have a ton of dudes on offense. I would play the Cardinals 10 times, or I'd play the Lions 10 times out of 10 over the Cardinals right now. And if I'm looking at it like that, then I can't not pick the Cardinals to beat the Lions. I think they're just the better team right now. I think they might be the better team throughout the year. But I think the Cardinals win this one. I don't think it's I don't know if it's necessarily the point explosion they've had the last 2 games, but I think they just keep the ball moving a lot better than the Lions do throughout the game. And I think they win this one just by virtue of yards, TOPs, things like that.
I will say this. The Arizona has one job this weekend, and it's to block the one Lion that has played superb so far, and that's Aiden Hutchinson. Already has 5.5 sacks. Had 4.5 sacks last week against Tampa Bay. So if they can find a way to block him, that I think they'll have an excellent shot of winning. If there's one guy who's made it incredibly tough against other teams so far, it's Aiden Hutchinson. So if you block him, you have a pretty good chance of winning. And that brings
who's the right tackle for
Arizona?
I think he was playing left now.
No, Paris is playing left.
Oh yeah. Okay, you're right. Calvin Beachum, unbelievable.
Wow. I know.
Wow.
He's filling in. Their regular starters injured.
Jonah Williams, I think.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's right. Wow. I didn't even realize he was still playing. I really didn't. It seems like an eternity ago when he was playing for Pittsburgh, but okay. That threw me for a loop there. That's unbelievable.
By the way, Charles DeMar, poster for this on Steeler Fury. When you're picking for the Lions next year, pick a quarterback. Just take my word for it. Pick a quarterback next year, because that's what the Detroit Lions are going to do in the draft for real.
After they just gave Goff that huge deal this offseason?
Hey, Atlanta picked Phoenix too. Like, you're not going to go into next year depending on Jared Goff. After the way this year goes, they won't do it.
No, that's fair. There's still a lot of time to play out this year and whether he lives up to that or not. But boy,
because Super Bowl windows, like when you have a good team, is short, man. It's not going to last that long.
Yeah, it's very true. It's just it's funny. You've seen teams where it feels like they're giving out these huge contracts to these quarterbacks, aka Jacksonville. But
Daniel Jones, excuse me.
Yeah, they're just really regretting it, big time. Like I understand, as league revenues, keep increasing, that quarterback pay is going to keep increasing, even though I have a different opinion on why that shouldn't be happening, but that's just me. Yeah, you see in the wide receiver market too. But go ahead, Will.
Jeremy, wait until the Steelers sign Justin Fields to a $40 million a year deal, which is what's coming.
Yeah, I know. So just for some context, SteelerFury.com, I kind of went on a really deep dive. I think it was on Monday, of like looking at the next year contract wise, what a Fields contract would look like, what a Pickens contract would I think will look like, because he'll be in the last year of his rookie deal, wanting his money. And the numbers I came up with for Justin Fields, I think was, and I know you're probably going to cringe, but just stay with me here. I think I said 4 years, 170 million. And, that puts them in the 42 and a half year range with a $50 million signing bonus. Another, I think I said 45 million in guarantees. So, okay, well, yeah, we don't need to be promoting that on the podcast. But yeah. And that was only because I was just trying to figure out what a team around Justin Fields would look like with him back. Not that I particularly want it. Who knows if the year keeps progressing in the way it is, maybe we could win with Fields or see Fields stay here. But anyway, that we're not going down that rabbit hole because we have to get to our 5-star matchup of the week this week.
Oh, wait, hey, can you guys help me out real quick? We don't have to spend a lot of time analyzing it, but the game I can't pick this week is Green Bay goes to Tennessee. So Tennessee's head coach during the game ripping the quarterback on the field in front of the cameras. After the game, bad things. Press conference after he has a chance to cool off, still bad things. And it's like he's got a young quarterback and he's ripping him in the press. He decided that that's the strategy he wants to go with. And I said a lot of good things about Brian Callahan on this show, but I'm not really sure how I feel about that. And then to add some extra drama, the Green Bay Packers are starting the guy that Tennessee drafted a couple of years ago that they just cut because they didn't feel he could win, who just won last week against the Colts. I'm not really sure. Is it like a revenge game for Malik Willis? Is it a bounce back game for Will Levis? Is everybody going to suck? Explain to me what's going to happen in this game and try to make it under 5 minutes.
Typically, I like to include these types of games on the games we pick, but I wasn't sure if we could fit it in, but we're going to now since you brought it up. Korey, it looked like you were ready to pounce on that. Go for it.
I think everyone sucks. And I think everyone sucks.
That's the option.
Yeah. The Packers might, look a little worse than they did last week. It's one I think Levis is gonna, maybe get some screws a little tighter this week, play a little better. He's been really rough these first 2 weeks. So I'm just gonna go with the Titans, but I think it's all gonna be bad. I think it's gonna be a Broncos Steelers looking game.
So if anything, Korey, you're telling me to bet the under.
Yes, I don't even
bet
know
the under, people. Bet the under, but I do want to mention that. I mean, the play that started Brian Callahan on his little tirade of where he literally says, "What the F are you doing?" I mean, that type of play.
Here's in my impersonation of Will Levis on that play. Take it.
Yeah, that was just as bad as that Raider Patriots game. I think it was last year where Ramondre Stevenson or whoever it is throws the ball all the way back, and might have been Chandler Jones, so it might have been 2 years ago. Takes it the other way when the game is tied and they can go to overtime. That's what that play reminded me of, was like, oh, that must have been just the biggest brain fart of your young career. So like you said, Brian Callahan was still hot about it after the game. And it's just one of those mistakes where it's like you literally just can't comprehend what you just saw happen. Type of deals.
It probably cost him the game, just like Nick's interception in the end zone did
Yeah.
Those red zone turnovers. I mean, I'm always talking about how the talk about the turnover battle is overrated, but making that kind of turnover, in the red zone when you have a chance to get points that's a killer, man. And
It's
especially
demoralizing.
not on an effort play where you're like, you were trying to reach for the goal line, you didn't make it. It's third down and you threw a risky pass in the end zone. Okay, yeah, we can get over that. But just sort of like, like almost like a panic move trying to make a play. That's not going to work very well. And I'm, big Will Levis fan, and he's, to be fair, a lot of great plays as well. Actually, but in both games. So it's like it's now you're getting to this territory where you can see what he's capable of, but if you don't clean up the kind of really awful mistakes, then it's not going to matter.
Yeah, I mean, boy, gun to my head, I guess I'm gonna say Tennessee pulls this one out, but it'll be ugly as hell because
I'm picking Tennessee because I don't expect, even though that Matt LaFleur's did a genius job last week, I can't see him winning 2 weeks in a row with Malik Willis. I feel like that's at least 50-50 proposition every week, and Tennessee has a lot of reasons to kind of bounce back. And they played very well against the Jets defense, except for really that play. That was otherwise they had a very respectable showing against the good defense.
Yeah,
I was looking for the over under just so that we could close it up. But anyway.
Yeah, you guys always say
it's
quarterbacks reverting back to the mean. I think that'll happen really quick for Willis.
Oh, by the way, same over under as the Steelers game, 36.5.
Good to know. Then let's bring
under.
Let's bring it to our game. Our 5-star matchup of the week. The Fighting Jim Harbaughs, aka the Chargers, find their way to go to Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is favored by 1.5. Will, I'll let you start.
Catchphrase.
I don't know if you've ever seen the Jim Harbaugh pounding, trying to hype up his quarterbacks by pounding them on the shoulder pads and the helmet, and the video from week 1 of Justin Herbert going, what? He went in for a hug because he didn't really understand what was happening. He's like, why are you touching me right now? Like I said, I think it's a race to 20. And in fairness, I will assume that the Steelers defense is as good as they've looked for 2 weeks. And the Chargers are not exactly playing to put up a lot of numbers on the board. So I don't expect the Chargers to get 41 again like they did the last time they played the Steelers. I also don't expect the Steelers to get 37 as they did and have a chance at the end of the game the way that they did the last time they played against the Chargers. I think it's two different teams now. We're both more reliant on defense and are interested in playing close to the best football. And if you can count on a Harbaugh for one thing, it's to allow Mike Tomlin, allow himself to get sucked into a Mike Tomlin game. So I do think it'll be a low scoring game, but just assuming that everybody is going to play, we're going to see kind of what we've seen from these teams the first 2 weeks, and everybody is going to play to their level. I feel like the Chargers are probably going to have a little bit more success in the passing game, and it may come down to like 2 or 3 plays. It doesn't have to be like, Justin Herbert to put up 300 yards. It's just those 2 or 3 plays that are the difference between getting a field goal or a touchdown. I see that. I unfortunately, I mean, I could go either way, especially if Justin Herbert's not 100%. But unless the Steelers can run the ball better than I think they can, or Justin Herbert can't pass it as well as I think he can, this comes off to me like a 20-16 victory for the Chargers. Unfortunately, I'm sorry because I know we were looking for like some optimism 2 weeks in a row, but I feel like it'll be a little bit of it'll be a good kind of a test and wake up call to see what they're made of the following week.
All right, Korey.
Yeah, I think this is almost a little bit of like a diamond tester game, seeing which team's kind of more real than the other, because I don't think either of these teams are, 2-0, like top of the league teams. But, this could be a big playoff implication game just because these two teams are going to be sitting around the same spot when it comes down to it at the end of the year. And for me, I think that I'm going to go with the Chargers on this one. I think that, Dobbins is averaging almost 10 yards a carry right now. He's looked really good. I think Herbert's way more likely to pilot his team to a game-winning drive, end of the half drive where we just won't get that out of Fields. I think, maybe if we play this game in 10 weeks, I might be more inclined to go with us. But I think just looking at this week, I think they get us. I think it's a close game, but I think they might pull away at the end 24-14.
It's not exactly how I pictured you guys doing this, so I'm going to play devil's advocate here, I guess, because I think that this will be a very challenging game for Pittsburgh as well. But I'll go back to the one thing that always is a nice surprise for me when it comes to Pittsburgh. Our defense is really good, and it just seems that no matter what I think a lot of times where I think, oh, this team, no, they're going to find a way to have success against Pittsburgh. I don't think Pittsburgh can pull it out. That's kind of how I feel about this one. And because of that, I'm going to say I don't know what I'm talking about. The Steelers are going to come out and win this one just because their defense is and has been so dominant. We mentioned earlier Watt could be an absolute nightmare for Alt in pass protection, with just how low he can get. And he's going to make Alt earn every bit of that first NFL paycheck in signing bonus. So just enough that we've been doing just enough. It feels like at home, Justin Fields making his first start in Pittsburgh. The hype is going to be there. The crowd's going to be there. That's one thing we haven't had yet. We haven't played a game at home. So I say the Steelers eke out a really close one. Score-wise, gosh, giving us 2 touchdowns. We almost had it last week, so I'll say we get at least 2. I like Will's theory here, race to 20. I think we win 2014. So something crazy like that, or 2017 even. So yeah, Steelers find a way to pull one off.
Just quickly, 2 things that you guys made me think of that I wanted to mention and didn't. The first is we talked about penalties earlier and how the Steelers have been killed by penalties.
Mm-hmm.
What's a big factor in that is the fact that they can't get any long running plays. They want to run a lot, but other than their quarterback, they don't really have anybody that's going to take off, turn a 5 or 6 yard gain into a 15 or 20 yard gain, right? And that's what the Chargers do. But the thing about getting your plays in 4 yards and 5 yards at a time is more plays on the field, more opportunities for penalties and mistakes. So that to me has always been an issue with playing that sort of style of football is you have to be perfect or else you can get easily throttled by a penalty at the wrong time. That was one thing. Second thing is we didn't talk about special teams at all. The Steelers special teams unit decimated, man. They Skoranek is hurt. They lost. They just put somebody on IR, Tyler Matakevich on IR, and what's his name, Scotty Miller. I think like so many guys that were contributing on special teams for them are going to be out this week. So don't be surprised if there's a special teams play that adds a little bit of flavor to that point situation. Yes, the Steelers have Boswell and their punter punted extremely well last week. We didn't mention him either. But yeah, it could be an issue in the game. You're just so shorthanded right now in coverage units.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. I didn't realize we were short so many key special teamers, as you put it. So
yeah, they re-signed James Pierre, who I think is going to be elevated to play in this game and be one of the gunners.
So, wow. I didn't even know he was back yet. So, but yeah, I guess gut just says they'll find a way to win their home opener with Justin Fields being there. I think
I admire your optimism.
I'm only optimistic because you guys chose to go negative. So but this is also the game that Fields needs to go out there and do really well, or else we're going to continue to hear this Justin Fields versus Russell Wilson thing all year long. By Russell's accounts, he said he could have played these first 2 weeks. So he's chomping at the bit to be out there. I know he wanted to be out there last week for sure against Denver. So it'll be just one more thing to monitor. If Fields plays well, feels like we're going to be on that train until, it completely falls off the rails. If he doesn't look that great, we're just going to keep having this go back and forth thing every single week. So, well, gentlemen, thank you for joining me on the early morning edition of the SteelerFury.com podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Kohlman. You Money Smith, smoking on the message boards, joined by the best co-host that money cannot buy in Wil Masisak. You know him as Bradshaw to Ben, and Korey Karbowsky. You know him as Corey39. So, gents, we'll see how this one goes. The optimism, I brought the optimism, you brought it down a little bit. That's how the show goes. We always balance one another out. So with that being said, here we go, Steelers.
Let's go, man. Here we go.